Hi, folks. This is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report. Well, you know, I always like to pass on things that I've experienced in fishing because I know more about it than anything else. I know more about what happens to me than I do about what happens to anyone else. And if I can pass some of the learning process of that on to you, then I think I've been somewhat successful. Well, recently, and this is a transition time, I've talked about how this is a time when everything changes for everything, animals and fish alike, and they go into their fall transition. And that transition can take place almost abruptly. Now, recently, we've had a lot more colder nights. It's making that water colder, and their habits are all changing very quickly. Well, the last few days, I've tried to get my last bit of wading in to the Grass River. That's a place that I know so well, and I know where the fish are. Well, I know where the fish were. Recently, when I go to the same spots where I could catch 100 fish a day in the summer, I struggle to get 2 or 3 strikes. And over the past few days, I've known that my ability and opportunity to be able to wade this river is quickly coming to an end for this year, because once the water level goes up, it becomes more dangerous for me to wade. The current's stronger, pushes against my sense of balance. And so I wanted to take advantage of the last few days. I went out yesterday to an area that just 4 days before I had caught walleyes and some really nice bass. And nothing. The conditions were the same. And I mean nothing, not even a strike. Not even a strike. And I thought, well, I'll say my last goodbyes to my favorite river until next year. And then I thought, you know what? It isn't dark yet. Maybe I could walk to the next pool or the next section of water that I hadn't fished for years, and I still have enough light to safely get back to my car, which was a long ways away. So I go to the next section. Now, I just spent 2 hours patiently casting into the pools where I was. Nothing. Go to the next section, and my world came alight. You wouldn't believe what started to happen. Now, I'll tell you one of the keys to that. On my first cast, I see a swirl, and something came, and I missed it, and it was big. And I did this 3 times until I finally hooked the fish for a microsecond, and my line parted. It had been a muskie, and it severed the line, because I don't use wire leaders when I'm fishing for bass or walleye. So in that pool, this was just down from the last pool. It's almost like the fish had migrated down to this pool. And I made another cast to the far shoreline, and I snag. I'm using a little tube jig, a 2.5-inch tube jig. I snag, and I'm like, I'm not going to walk across that river, even though I don't want to lose the jig. So I start tightening my line, my pole's bending, and I'm thinking, I think that snag was upstream from where it is now. So I put a little bit more pressure, and I feel a thump, 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 and a heavy, heavy thump, 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 not a little tap. And the rod starts bending, and it almost doubles over, and then it goes slack. And the hook had pulled out. And this happened 4 or 5 times in a row to me, that I would cast out. I wouldn't feel a strike. And I'm using braided line, and you can feel almost anything, but I wouldn't. My pole would just start bending a bit. And I'm like, okay, I've hooked another rock. I got to be careful here. It'd bend a little more, and then I'd feel thump, thump, thump. And I couldn't set the hook. I'd yank, and it was slack. And I'd bring the tube back in, cast again. This happened 4 or 5 times, seriously. And on the 5th time, I hook it, and all hell breaks loose. The water explodes, and I'm onto a muskie. I bring the muskie in. I had nothing to land it with, no wire leader, and I'm wading in the water. Fortunately, and I say fortunately, and muskie fishermen say fortunately, but fortunately, it was only about 30 inches. So I was able to reach down and put my hands around its head, basically, without getting them near those wicked teeth. And I was able to get the little tube jig out of the corner of its mouth. Fortunately, it wasn't inside. And I wished it a goodbye, and it swam away completely unharmed. I cast out again, and I start getting the thumps again. And then all goes, and it's gone. And I can't tell you what was happening. I had already had one break my line or bite it off. I landed another. Was this pool full of muskies? I don't have, or was it the same muskie just going and biting over and over again, which doesn't really make sense. And I'll never know the answer. I don't know. I've never known muskies to gather together like that in a pool. They're a solitary lone fish most of the time, and they dominate a certain area. But this was my results of the day. It was a wonderful day, even though I didn't really catch a lot of fish. I did hook several, and by several I mean maybe a half a dozen really nice smallmouth in that same pool. And above there, I'd never got a strike. Never got a strike through the whole distance I'd fished. So I guess this is a story about what happens in the fall. What is the answer? I still don't know. I don't know if I had a bunch of muskies. I don't know if they migrate like that. I know that I've spent 30 years trying to figure out where bass in these rivers go in the fall. I don't know if I'm any closer. But if I do come up with the answer, I'll certainly pass it on to you. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report.